Next, can I ask and introduce you to, I should say, John Hubbard, who's from FIRA, but importantly is one of the auditors for the Furniture Industry Sustainability Programme. Oh, I need to switch this slide, don't I? Well done. We were actually sat on a panel discussion, because I also sit on the committee at FISP, and we were sat on a panel discussion at the January Furniture Show, a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it?
2 weeks ago.
And we were just explaining and talking about the fact that it's so important that this programme is available to all of our industry, it's pan-industry, and most importantly, it's suitable for big companies, but also very small, even down to micro businesses. So I'll stop talking and let John do the talking.
Good morning. This is my first time at the Furniture Makers Hall, so this is quite a new experience to me. I joined FIRA just over 2 years ago, having previously worked for another consumer products research association. One of my roles is as technical lead on the Furniture Industry Sustainability Programme. The Furniture Industry Sustainability Programme is an industry-wide programme. It is not owned by FIRA. FIRA just carry out the administration on behalf of the scheme. It is owned by its members, but it's supported by British Furniture Manufacturers, Commercial Interiors UK, FIRA and the MBF. So it is really pan-industry. And that's the important thing that we want to sort of establish with this, is it's created by the industry for the industry. So it is using the principles that a lot of people are familiar with in ISO 14001, but it is focusing very much on the challenges that impact our industry. No, I've done that one. The buttons are in a different place. No, that's all right, got it. But the important thing is we want it to be three things. Credible, so it has the backing of the industry, but also recognition by other bodies across the industry, such as SCAR. And it has had quite a lot of success in the commercial sector, and but we're not yet as recognised in the domestic sector, but hopefully that is something that is coming. Accessible is important, that it is appropriate for all the industry, and we do really want to focus on making it accessible for the smaller organisations, and there are ways that we are doing that. I'll come into that as we go through. And the other thing is challenging. What this scheme needs to do is lead the industry through. And really, it's a positive scheme, because we're trying to recognise those people who have got best practice. And I'm glad that Jessica mentioned this concept of green hushing. What FISP we want to do is allow a mechanism and a forum for people to sort of say, this is what we're doing, these are the achievements we've made, and this is the recognition that we're getting from our peers as part of we've gone through a process, and we're recognised at a level where someone has come in and looked at what we're doing and seen how that improves sustainability going forward. And I say the industry covers everything. We've got component suppliers, we've got material suppliers, and a lot of big manufacturers, but we've also got a lot of design studios and smaller manufacturers, which it really does mean that we have the full range of industry as part of the scheme. So there are two sets of criteria for FISP. They are one for manufacturers and assemblers, which is probably a majority that people, members are part of. So anyone who's doing any manufacturing would fall into that scheme. And then there's another set of criteria for distributors, resellers and fit-out companies, and retailers would go into that. At the moment, there are about 65 members of FISP whose information is displayed on the website. And because it's a audit scheme and there is a periodic audit, if people don't get their audits in on time, their membership will sort of temporarily lapse until their audits are renewed, until their certificates are renewed. So it's important to get their audits in on time. But so there's normally around 65 to 70, and that has increased because when I started doing this about 2 years ago, there was probably between 55 and 60. So we have actually increased membership. We have lost a few, which is inevitable, but we are on an upward trend, which is really, really positive, and we keep getting inquiries. And when we get inquiries, what we try to do is sort of talk to the potential members and see where they are on their journey. And some of them say, well, they look at what the criteria involve and say, well, we're not quite there yet. So we try and support people on their journey towards FISP. But the actual people who are certified is between 65 and 70. So why do people want to become members of FISP? One of the things, once you are on the FISP website, the website is searchable by product type. So whenever someone joins, we send them a profile form to really capture what they want to put on there. And it's searchable by product type. So if you are looking for a kitchen supplier, you can put in kitchens and it will bring up all the FISP members who are kitchen suppliers. So you can search by whichever type of product you're interested in. So it's really allowing members to showcase their positive aspects. It is recognised by other schemes, and currently there is a lot of use of FISP as being part of tender documents. So that the people looking for their suppliers are saying, is FISP part of your business? That allows them to have assurance in their supply chain. What we're also trying to do is increase the amount of information available on the FISP website to support people through changes in legislation, having things like legislative registers and templates available, and just generally putting newsletters up there that summarise things that are happening that might impact the industry. So, in terms of FISP, how does it work? As I say, there are two different sets of criteria. Now, the criteria are scored criteria. In each section that you choose, you must get at least 50% in each module. And the thing about the two sets of criteria is they are largely asking the same questions, but the big difference between them is which modules are mandatory. In the manufacturing side, we focus very much on environmental management systems, waste, energy consumption, and if they are using timber, then we have a mandatory section on timber. In the fit out and distributor side, we're more interested in the supply chain, the sustainable and ethical supply chain. So that module is mandatory in those sections. We also have social modules, social and economic modules, because again, the three pillars of sustainability are environmental, social and economic. So we don't just focus purely on the environment, we are focusing on the whole business, including the social and economic side. So the mandatory modules in the social and economic side are employee well-being, but we are also looking at things like training, business resilience and community relations. But there are 9 different modules in the environmental modules, and I think 6 in the, might be 7, social and economic modules. And the thing is, you choose which modules you do. And so as long as you complete the mandatory ones, the other ones are there to showcase the areas where your sustainability is a positive aspect. And this recognises that there is a massive amount of diversity in the industry about what people are doing, the way that they're doing it, and the different models of distribution that become important. Each member pays a membership fee, which supports the administration and operation of the scheme and promotion of the scheme. So when I went to the furniture show, when I'm doing other promotion events, and also the development. That's important that the criteria are not static, that we are constantly moving forward and challenging the industry, and we are currently going through a criteria revision to make sure that the criteria are credible and challenging. If you are already ISO 14001, we recognise that, and we put those companies onto a 2-year audit cycle. And at every audit, what we're looking for is obviously continuous improvement, which again is something that comes from ISO 14001. But we're also looking at areas where you can improve. Every report, no matter how great you are, there are things that you say, well, what are you doing about this? We always try to put in the reports that we do a challenge, because the reports are confidential to the companies that have the reports. The certificates are what is publicly available to say that you are FISP members. But within that conversation that we have during the audits, we can help the companies, we can talk about experience, and we can then challenge them to see what they can do next. So basically, the audits are every year or every 2 years, depending on your certification status, and they are often very, very beneficial for the companies, especially in this over the past few years where there's been a massive amount of change. Companies have had a lot of issues with staff turnover, staff availability, and market issues. So we're really trying to make it a positive experience. We're not there to slap people over the wrist. We're there to encourage and develop. So what do we want to go forward with FISP? I say it's I think something that there is no other scheme that does what FISP does for the furniture industry. It is the industry scheme. So we are, currently undertaking a revision of the criteria to keep the programme relevant and credible. We want to challenge and support the industry to meet the sustainability demands of the supply chain, but also we've got to keep an eye on the future legislative requirements, because what this doesn't want to be is just a legislative tick box exercise. This is for those companies that want to be leading the sustainability discussion in the industry. We want to keep this as an aspirational standard that people will work towards and want to have as recognition of what they're doing in the sustainability field. It has historically, been very much focused on the contract sector. But in 2021, we welcomed our first retail member, and that has been a very positive experience. And what they have done is they've included in FISP in their supply manual as one of the options for supply, for those companies that don't yet have things like ISO 14001. And so from that, we've now welcomed in some domestic furniture manufacturers into the FISP scheme. So I think it has a positive outlook. Most of the audits are carried out by FIRA, but not all of them, and the other organisations can provide audit services. So it's, I think, a scheme that really does reflect the industry coming together to try and set standards going forward. And I hope that this can be recognised not just within the industry, but also perhaps by government and those outside the industry, as the industry taking a positive step forward. If you are interested, please talk to me during the day or email me at FIRA, and so we can then talk about how FISP would work with your business and how we could sort of set up going forward and what it would mean to actually get through that audit process. We normally operate on a sort of 2-month schedule. So if you're booking audits, we're normally booking at least 2 months ahead to keep that in flow. Because obviously we're very conscious that when people's audits are due, we don't want them going over their date so they inadvertently fall off the website. So we always contact them in advance. So that's why we tend to have this 2-month lead time to get the audits done, because we've already committed to our audit members. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them now.
We've run out of time.
Oh, goodness. I thought I was being really good.
But please, one point I would like to make is I want to thank Alan Watkins is here today. Alan is chair of FISP. So hi, Alan. And there is a stand upstairs. So during the break periods, please do go and see John and Alan and find out more about FISP. It really is so important to have recognition, I think, for the efforts that we're making towards greater sustainability. So, moving swiftly on. Thank you, John. I appreciate it. So there's been lots of talk about carbon measurement and carbon footprints, and I'm sure a number of people still find it confusing. So we've asked one of our experts, Nicola Pichel-Juan, to join us from SATRA to talk about that today.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. I'm from SATRA. We're based up in Northamptonshire and we support the furniture industry with testing, consultancy and advice. So there's lots of different ways of looking at carbon. So I'm going to be looking at this from an organisational carbon footprint perspective today. So usually, I guess, when SATRA are at these events, we're there because we're the experts. We're not necessarily the experts in this, but what we can hopefully share with you is our journey over the last 12 months from sort of not really having looked at this at all to being in what we think is quite a good position now. So going back to some of the things that were discussed earlier, so why is it important to understand what your impacts are as an organisation? So we go back to climate change. So this is just a few headlines from the BBC News front page over the last sort of 6 months or so. China's worst drought on record, third of Pakistan under floods, and I think most of us experienced the 45-degree heat in the UK last year, record temperatures across Europe. And these used to be sort of once in a generation, once in a lifetime events, but as a result of climate change, they're happening with an sort of ever more increasingly frequently, and then more intense as well when they do happen. So all of that's led to the Paris Agreement 2015, trying to keep global temperature rise this century to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. UK strategy to be net zero by 2050, and has also been discussed. There's lots of legislation coming relating to carbon emissions and reporting. So at the moment, a lot of that only impacts directly bigger organisations that are on the stock market or with turnover in sort of tens of millions of pounds. But that pressure is going to be fed back down the supply chain to smaller organisations who are going to be asked what their emissions are and what they're doing about them. Again, commercial pressures, business to business, it's required in the tender documents, and consumers are increasingly wanting to understand and know that businesses are behaving responsibly. And there's also a cost element to it. So some things that you can do to be more sustainable will have a cost, but actually a lot of things that you do to reduce your energy consumption is going to have a cost impact as well, a positive cost impact. So when you start talking about organisational carbon footprint, people start talking about Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3. And really what that is that's sort of defining where in the organisation's supply chains are the emissions occurring and who's responsible for them. So some emissions will be the direct responsibility of the company pulling their data together, and some will be indirect, occurring so upstream or downstream in the supply chain. So Scope 1 and Scope 2, these typically, even a lot of big organisations will focus only on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions because they're the ones that they can directly do something about. They're under their control. So Scope 1 would be things like company cars and the emissions associated with the petrol and the diesel that those cars use, and fugitive emissions. So that could be things like refrigerants from air conditioning systems. Scope 2, really straightforward. That's the emissions associated with any energy that the company purchases. And Scope 3 really can be anything else that happens within that supply chain, from goods and services purchased by the company that will have their own impact, business travel, commuting, waste, and freight and transportation. So all of those things will have their own impacts associated with them, which if you're looking at Scope 3 will be part of your organisational carbon footprint. So SATRA's journey so far, actually as of April last year, we hadn't really done anything on this at all. We'd got some spreadsheets showing what our energy consumption data was over time, and that was it. And we were really struggling to get going. We talked to a few consultancy companies, And there are some good consultancies out there, but some of them wanted tens of thousands of pounds, which was money that we just didn't have. And we were really struggling to sort of understand where to get going. Do we just stick with scopes 1 and 2, or do we go with scope 3 as well? We signed up in May last year with an online carbon management platform, and that sort of comes with a little bit of consultancy alongside it, and that's sort of changed the game for us really. And by October, we'd calculated the scope 1 and 2 emissions for our main site, as well as having a high-level view of scope 3. So once we got into it, it wasn't as scary or as impossible as we first thought it would be. And actually, a lot of the information we had readily available throughout the business anyway. So scope 1 and 2, utility bills, electricity, gas, and water consumption. F-gas register, any building with air conditioning has to, by law, have an F-gas register, which will tell you how much refrigerant you've got, and you have to keep records of how much refrigerant you top up into those systems. We've got a number of company cars, so we're in a fuel card scheme, so that told us how much fuel we've purchased. So we had that data available. Scope 3, for anyone who's tried to look at Scope 3 is where it starts to get really complicated. But again, some of that data you can get hold of quite easily. If you're paying companies to take your waste away, they'll be able to tell you how much they've taken away and what type of waste it was. We keep details of business travel anyway within our HR department. We did a detailed spend analysis. So we looked at all of our spend for the previous year and then categorized that spend to understand what it was. Was it freight spend? Was it sort of new technical equipment coming into the business, etc.? And we also did a commuter survey that was built into the platform to understand the impact of people coming to and from work. So that gave us the underlying data, but that doesn't tell us what our impact is. So the platform that we're using does this for us, but basically anyone calculating their organisational carbon footprint is going to be using the same sets of data. In the UK, DEFRA publish conversion factors on an annual basis for impacts that can be used for reporting, and the ONS also produce emissions intensity data for other areas. So 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, that has a CO2e or greenhouse gas emissions impact of 0.21 kilograms. Refrigerant, typical refrigerant that might be used in an air conditioning system, 2,088 kilos of CO2 for a kilogram of refrigerant. So that's sort of huge. That was one of the things that we weren't really aware just how much of an impact that had until we started looking at it. Travel as well. A kilometre in long haul in premium economy, if you do a return to Bangkok, you're looking at about 4.5 tonnes of carbon emissions just associated with that return flight. I think it's always useful to put this into context. One of the other areas we work in is shoes. And an average pair of shoes will have an impact of 10 to 15 kilos per pair. So that kind of helps to sort of give it a sort of real life context. If you start talking about an organisation's emissions in terms of thousands of tonnes, what does that actually mean? So our learnings so far, it's not going to be perfect in year one, especially if you're looking at the scope 3 emissions, but you've got to start. And as you start, you can then refine that process as you go forward. Make some sensible assumptions where you need to. When we started looking at our supplier spend, we had a list of around 700 suppliers, but 289 of those gave us 95% of our spend. So we just focused on those suppliers. We're not really going to get any benefit from trawling through another 344 suppliers to categorise what we purchased for them. Helps to collate and record the data throughout the year. So if you can get your energy bills and your water bills, etc., as they come in each month and each quarter, that saves time at the end of the year having to sort of try and find where they are and who's got them. Some things that we knew would have a high impact, but it really shocked us just how high it was. Putting anything on a flight, so people or goods, as soon as you put anything on a flight, you're really going to be getting into tons and tons of impacts, whether that's freighting goods around the world as we do with some of the test equipment that we send to our customers, or travel, which is an essential part of business, again now, post-COVID. And refrigerant, one air conditioning leak we had was equivalent to 40% of our impact from electricity consumption for the whole year. So refrigerant was a really big thing that we hadn't really been looking at. So really, we've only just begun. We are now working on calculating the 2021 impact for our other 3 sites. And we've started calculating 2022 impacts. Scope 3 is the tricky bit, so we want to start to zone in a little bit more on that and do a more detailed analysis and categorization. And then we want to look back as well to 2018. So 2018 is a key year that's used for science-based targets, which some of you may have heard of, which is used for setting reductions, so net zero by X year or reducing emissions. So we want to go back and look at where we were in 2018 for those Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And that's where the challenge really begins. We've got to align with a reporting protocol to set our targets, reduce our emissions. So we've reduced our energy consumption by 5% already year on year, but we've obviously got a long way to go, and then continue to track our progress. So hopefully that gives an insight into actually getting going and some of the data that you need to start doing an organisational carbon footprint. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Nicola. And I think it's worth pointing out, it's not just a nice to have, as I think, Nicola, you've already pointed out, but if you are supplying public sector, there is now a public procurement notice, I think it came in 21 off the top of my head, that if the spend is of a sufficient level, then you have to be measuring Scope 1, 2, and 3. So, you know, if that's your aspiration to start working in that area of work, then you need to be measuring. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. Moving on. So we've talked about what needs to be measured, how you measure it, but it's not just about measuring, it's about reducing carbon impact. And Rollie Attard is here today from Panaz to talk around implementation of solar panels within his business. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. I actually think one of the things that I've learned so far is if I keep it to exactly 15 minutes, no one can ask me any difficult questions. So I'm here to talk about capital investment in renewables. And so the capital investment is one side. And actually, I think for us, and by the way, so we're a fabric manufacturer based in the Northwest. To add some context to that, I'm the CEO. We export to 50, 60 different countries around the world, so we do have a global footprint. But as I said, I think what I'm going to try and do is talk about our journey, because everyone is on a different journey when it comes to this, and every business is different. So I think hopefully by talking about what we do and how we address it, we can find something interesting and for people to take away from it. And I'll put some case studies in there as well. The first question really that we ask ourselves, and businesses should ask themselves too, is what your motivation is. And the reason I say that, because the social responsibility is one thing. We've heard about climate change and those elements which are really obviously front of the agenda. But as a business, you have to rationalise that. I think for us, it was about understanding what our investment drivers actually are. So the first step for us was determining what our ESG strategy was. And for us, I'll talk more about it, but we settled on tangible sustainability. I've listed a number of different drivers there, and that is by no means an exhaustive list. And for us, I'll revisit a couple of those in relevance to some of our projects that we've worked on over the last few years. And I think determining that at the start of your project or at the start of your ESG journey is really important, and certainly again when you're building business cases for individual projects as well. So further to that, I want to talk about ours, which is tangible sustainability. I've given a number of different examples of what I mean by that, but really the origin of that for us was when I started looking at the environmental space and what as a business we could do better in that area. I came across things like carbon offsetting, carbon credits, and on the face of things, this is great. Okay, actually I could buy carbon credits, and go net zero in the business. Once you start looking into that sort of stuff, you sort of go, actually, that's not particularly legitimate. What can we really do? What's going to drive an actual benefit? And for us, that was a tangible sustainability thing. I think gone are the days where I think it was JP Morgan actually, where the they offset their business and said they were carbon neutral based on the trees that they planted in the chairman's hunting estate in New England. So I think gone are those days, and I think you've got to prove things a bit more meaningful, I think. And that's where our sentiment with tangible sustainability comes from. I've listed a number of projects there, and I'll talk about two of those as sort of mini case studies. And I'll touch on a couple of the others briefly, and the benefits there. So what I've given you, so for example, the beehives and rewilding, we put beehives in at the office. They are managed by staff in our head office, and it's been a fantastic engagement piece for one. Our employees absolutely interacted with it. They manage it, they own it, and it's fantastic. And that for us, it's that social responsibility element. When I talk, I've referenced it at the top there, corporate social investments. And those are investments that aren't made with the idea of driving bottom line, driving profit in the business. And that certainly falls into that bracket. The planting a tree thing is important, but you can plant trees all over the world. We plant trees within Lancashire, within our local area, and we get our staff to do it. And I think we'll have planted by the end of this year, just in the last 12 months, about 15,000 trees. Again, it's that tangible impacting on your local area that was important to us. EV, electric vehicles and charging points, that's an obvious one. And then post-consumer recycling, which I'll mention. So going into sort of my first, mini case study to talk briefly about this. When you're looking at products in fabric particularly, you can actually claim something's recycled if you're 30% recycled, which for me doesn't seem a particularly high amount of recycled content. And it's really reasonably unregulated. Now for us, we set the bar for ourselves as saying, if we're going to say something's recycled, it has to be 100% recycled. And the reason that's important for us is because if something is 100% recycled polyester, you can then circular recycle something. So it comes that circularity is really important. If you take a polyester product and you slap a back coating on it for FR purposes, it's not recyclable. It's downcyclable, but it's not recyclable. So for us, that was a really important element of our product strategy within the renewables and within the sort of environmental and sustainable space. And that brings us on to the secondary part of that project, which is post-consumer recycling. So that is being able to offer to our customers to go, take away their used drapery, for example, take that away, use chemical recycling to repurpose that into plastic chip to then convert it back into yarn. And that's a secondary project that we're working on in depth now. And I'm happy to say we're getting a lot closer. So, second case study, which is the one that Joanna mentioned at the start, was something we scoped in, I think it actually was more 2020/21, to put solar panels on the roof of our building, which, again, understanding the investment drivers is important. And for us, I think the sustainability of the building and the overall message, the staff engagement was really important. But also, from a business perspective, from a commercial perspective, it was managing the uncertainty, around electricity pricing, and to some degree, actually, and I'd be lying if I didn't say this, financial payback, because that's important in any project you undergo. So I've summarised the business case there, and you'll see that we were targeting on the overall investment, which is, in this case, it was £64,000, to get the project to pay back on our current electricity usage in around about 5 years, just under, I think it was about 4.5 years, which from a business perspective is viable. I think once you start straying into 5+ years, things become less viable as a project. So on the face of it, okay, it's got some really good features. So we decided to progress. Fortuitous timing really, with the economy going the way it did, but obviously we didn't forecast that. So this is how it worked out. Our site usage, obviously maintained, and actually we harvested pretty much what we expected. But what actually sweetened it really for us was that we got some grant funding, which I recommend. Speak to your local Chamber of Commerce, and they can often help you out. I know obviously the furniture makers, I'm sure, will point in the right direction, CI UK as well. So we got that, which made it a little bit easier on the payback period. And actually, once we made the calculations on our existing rates, we were paying back pretty much within 2 years, which is fantastic. When you factor in, I think once you've, if we actually got, once we get a new rate, then it becomes significantly higher. And then, utilising the super deduction as well is particularly advantageous at the moment. For us, though, I think one of the important things about it was the additional benefits that weren't part of the original scope. And I think once we started diving into it, we realised that we could get. So the first one I mentioned there is how we managed to channel the electricity power, and channeling 75% of that to our manufacturing. What that allowed us to do was to channel that directly to our biggest usage, which is digital and transfer print. So by doing that, actually, we made our print function powered by solar, which was something which I said we hadn't factored in the beginning, but was a fantastic thing to be able to provide to our customers. We installed electric vehicle charging as well in the last 12 months, which again benefits from that power. So we charge our cars from our fleet of from our sales reps and others in the business, and vans by solar power. We also put electricity back in the grid, but I tell you what, they don't pay you very much for that. As part of it, we did a site audit as well, which is really important. And I think by understanding that better, you can understand where you can really have a knock-on impact for the rest of your business. So for us, all of those additional benefits really were a fantastic bonus and something you couldn't factor in, but have really made that project even more viable. And the payback period has also been fantastic on that project. In all their glory, our solar panels, covering about, I think we're about a quarter of the roof at the moment. So room for expansion, and that's certainly something that we've been looking at. I think that anyone who's tried to get solar panels within the last year would tell you that it's become a lot more difficult. And I think so for us, it's been a fantastic investment. But one thing I would say is that if you are going to go down the route of something like that, shop around, find the right partners, because we had quotes that were double, triple where we actually ended up paying. Talk to your Chamber of Commerce, talk to the right contacts, talk to people who've done it before, get grant funding. There's fantastic projects like the Macau project out there that will help you to provide funding for renewables projects. And I'm sure if everyone wants to hear more about that, come and talk to me afterwards. I'm happy to share any contacts that we have in that area. So just, I say, very, very basic, and I wanted to keep it simple. But for us, this was sort of how we managed our journey from a very simple level. It's really, as a business, determine your overall ESG investment standards, and by doing that, also determine your strategy. Then I think for us, it was about understanding our individual investment objectives. And as you saw out of the different investments that we've undertaken, both capital and general, they all had totally different drivers, but all fantastic benefits to the business overall. And then, very importantly, measure it. Understand your investment, plan it properly, and make sure that it delivers on objectives and KPIs you set out at the start. Oh. 3 minutes. Damn it.
We do have a bit of time if anybody wants to, or alternatively, I know, Rollie, you're staying over at lunch, aren't you? So I'm sure we'd be happy to talk to you on a one-to-one basis. Is there anyone that'd like to ask an urgent question now?
Yeah, I would.
Go for it.
So you mentioned that you purchased beehives. How many beehives and what impact?
So originally we started out with 3 beehives at the back of the building. As part of the project, we rewilded because you have to have an area for the bees to feed. So we rewilded the whole area around, which is all planted by our staff members. So research, and my brother is in the crowd over here. He's the one that actually headed up that project. So he will tell you exactly what we planted. But we rewilded the whole area, maintained the beehives. And as I mentioned, the staff engagement's been fantastic. We have a huge amount of bees at the back, which I thought might have been a health and safety issue initially, but I was told it is not. But I think, he says. But I think for us, it was just that giving back element. It won't be a mystery to anybody sat here that bees are declining in our country. And for us, it's something that was a start, and actually something that we can then start building on. And we're at the point now, I think Simon might correct me if I'm wrong, we're getting to the period where they'll start swarming, and then we start harvesting honey, and that's also been fantastic to give that back to our staff. So again, it's that sort of impact on your local environment. The planting trees thing, again, was an important part of that, but it's having an impact on your local area to make it better, really. And I think if you want more contact details for the people that helped us set that up, I'm happy to provide those, because it's been a really great investment for us.
You want to quickly say that company that helped you start?
Yeah, they're called the Bee Centre.
The Bee Centre.
Mm-hmm. It's a creative name. But I can provide contact details, things if people want to see.
Thanks, Rollie. I think what's interesting for me is it might be easy for people to think that sustainability is just about protecting the planet. It's actually about protecting people and planet. And that also means that any sustainability has to be affordable and achievable from an economic perspective, because it's not sustainable if it's not economically viable. So perhaps that's me doing a really clever segue to say you need to sustain yourself with food, and it's now lunchtime.
Can I just add something as well, if I
Please
may?
do.
The other thing about the roof panels, the solar system, is the fact that unfortunately we don't have a situation in this country where we have good batteries to store electricity. And so, as a consequence, we could have covered the whole roof with solar panels, but we decided not to, because you've got to basically utilise the electricity when it comes in. So for evenings or when you're not working, obviously weekends, all you're doing is putting it back into the grid. And as Rollie said, it's a derisory amount of money that you get. It's very, very small. So until you can actually start storing it, you have to model your solar panels according to your energy consumption during the day. And that's why we've only got that amount of panels. That's what we worked out.
Is that based on summer and winter utilisation?
Yeah, absolutely. You'd be surprised how much you generate in the winter as well. And it's great. When you see the meter and you see all that electricity coming in, and actually the big cables, they're almost throbbing. It's absolutely astounding. Very, very satisfying. I'll tell you.
Particularly at the moment, I would think. Okay, well, as I say, lunch is available. We have just made the decision to be vegetarian and vegan for obvious reasons. So sorry for all you carnivores. Thank you. Thanks, Fred.